Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Re-Federalist Report. I am Brady, also known as War Hamster. Today is Thursday, March the 12th, 2026, and we are on episode 19 of our review of Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia of 1787. Joining me today is my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution, Douglas V Gibbs.
Hi.
Doug and I are both on the mend. If you could listen to our last episode and compare my voice today to back then, I'm getting all my strength back. So hopefully I'm ornery again too. Doug's also on the mend. It sounds like he's going to live after all, and maybe we'll actually get through the end of Madison's notes one of these years.
Yeah, maybe.
How you doing today, Doug?
Oh, we're doing fantastic. We're after we're done here, we got stuff to do in town and people to see, and then come home and finish watching a movie. And one of these days, and Ron has already gotten on to me this. I have a feeling this is a big movie due. One of these days, and I actually put it here for me to watch. I'm actually going to watch Gettysburg.
I don't know if I've seen it.
Oh, Ron says it's a great movie. So
I still
have to watch Last of the Mohicans too,
which is my all-time favorite.
I had a feeling that was on your list. His too. She has seen it. I haven't, but I've read the book a couple times. So
they're both not the same.
They're not the same. Okay.
They're both
for those of you who are watching, my lovely wife loves to hang out nearby, listen to what's going on, kind of do her own thing, and so
it is not only is it one of my favorite books, but it is my all-time favorite movie, and it is probably my all-time favorite soundtrack. So I'm a big fan.
Good.
All right, shall we jump in?
Sure, let's do this.
Oops, that's not what I want to do. I want to share my screen. And we're going here. For those of us who are just recently joining us, what we're doing is going through Madison's notes, word for word. And we are here on a website put on by, it's the Avalon project at Yale University, one of the few things they do well. And this calendar I'm looking at is basically every day they met in the Constitutional Convention. We are all the way up to June 21st, and we'll be going all the way through September 17th. So we got a few months to go.
And for those of you, while he's clicking, the Avalon Project is a website where pretty much every old document, whatever, not just American documents. I mean, you can go back to the Magna Carta. They are online. And it's a great place if you want to look up Madison's notes, Federalist papers, the Articles of Confederation, or any other older document you would love to be able to look at the text of.
And I'm in the process of having an AI robot scrape the entire site and put every single article on that site into a searchable database so that when I'm doing shows that are not like this, but similar, and someone brings up, a certain, Federalist paper, I've got it right at my fingertips, searchable at all times. So when that project is done, I'm going to be, I might be dangerous. We'll see. All right, when we left off, James Madison.
How dangerous can a hamster be? I mean, come on.
But you got to remember, it's a war hamster, not just any old hamster. So when we left off the debates, we had everyone from Wilson to James Madison himself, and the discussion really came down to how they're going to portion this new legislature. They've decided it's going to be bicameral. The question is, how are we going to select our senators and congressmen and members of the House of Representatives? They took a vote on that, and that was on the second part of the resolution, which is basically what they just talked about. So we move in here. We broke right there, and now they're looking at the third resolution of the initial report. The guy who's about to speak.
Real quick warning for those of you who new. In this document, right now, in this part of this document, they say the word branch. They mean House of the Legislature, not branches of government, just to alleviate any confusion that some of you might have gotten. So go ahead.
Yeah, they're imitating England to some degree of having a senior branch and a junior branch. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're looking at here, what they're describing. Senior branch, of course, being the Senate or the House of Lords in the case of England. The first guy to speak here is a General Pinckney. He's from South Carolina, and I wanted to go into him a little bit before we get into the substance because he's an interesting guy. Now, there are two Pinckneys from South Carolina that are there at the convention. Charles Coatsworth Pinckney is the guy who's about to speak, and he would become a general. His cousin would later on become a governor of South Carolina, and as did Charles Coatsworth's brother, Thomas.
Mhm.
And they were both governors of South Carolina. But let's talk about Charles Coatsworth a little bit. I'm just jumping to his wiki page. There's a nice little picture of Charles Coatsworth.
And with them both having the first name Charles, you can see why Madison wrote General Pinckney.
Exactly. I believe his cousin only rose to the rank of major. I'd have to double check that. Born 1746 to 1825, he's an American statesman, military officer, and founding father who served as a U.S. minister to France from 1796 to 1797.
That would be
Doug,
during Adams.
do you think anything
No, that'd be
interesting
tail
happened?
end of Washington. No,
What's
first
that?
part of Adams. First part of Adams. I'm never mind. Go ahead.
Well, he actually got there under Washington.
Yeah.
Washington's the guy who appointed him to go to France.
Okay.
We'll get to that. But what happened in France, 1796 and 97, we'll get into that. But it's interesting. That's why I wanted to talk about him.
Yeah, that's right. It's the last year of Washington, and so it changed out when Adams took office.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Pinckney was twice nominated by the Federalist Party as its presidential candidate in 1804 and 1808, losing both times. That's why you don't have a President Pinckney on Mount Rushmore.
Adams being the only Federalist Party president, by the way. John Adams, the father. Go ahead.
Yeah, because the election of 1800, which we'll talk about, the Federalists got the floor mopped with themselves. They got swept out of power, never to return, thank goodness. Born into a planter class family from South Carolina, he practiced law. He was a supporter of independence from Great Britain, served in the Revolutionary War, and became a brigadier general. After the war, he got elected to the South Carolina legislature, where he and brother Thomas represented the landed slavocracy of South Carolina Low Country. Obviously, we know who the editor of Wikipedia was. He becomes a delegate of the Philadelphia Convention. He's got a town named after him. Pinckney had declined George Washington's first offer to serve in his administration. But in 1796, he accepted the position of minister to France. So what's going on in France what's going on between France and the United States at this point in time?
Well, while they were allies during the war, there is some tension because of the British and French tensions. And Jefferson, who was Secretary of State at this time, leaned towards supporting France in these discussions and disagreements and ultimately a war. Meanwhile, Hamilton kind of leaned towards supporting Britain. And so it is interesting to me that Pinckney, being a member of the Federalist Party, which means he allies with Hamilton, would be appointed to be the minister to fascinating. That's fascinating situation, or considering where the loyalties lied when it came to the parties.
What year did Jefferson resign as Secretary of State? Do you have that off the top of your head? Or do I need to look that up?
No, I don't. But he did right about the time he created, I believe it was shortly after he created his political party, because he wanted to spend more time on that.
Well, what you have is the Hamiltonians want alliance with England because Hamilton always wanted to be a miniature, an American continent version of England.
Right.
And we'll see that in what he says. He's a big government statist, who all these Federalists are.
Right.
That's who Pinckney is, and I think that's an important thing to bring up.
Yeah, well, a Hamiltonian ally. Got to remember, folks, Alexander Hamilton stood up at one point during this Constitutional Convention calling for the president to essentially be a king, have a lifetime appointment. And when you read his Federalist Papers, you can see even though he tempers it quite a bit, you can still see his drive for a national centralized government. He believes if you're going to survive in a world of empires, you got to be an empire.
Very much so. So I'm just going to skip down a bit for this. Though he had resisted joining either major party for much of the 1790s, Pinckney began to identify with the Federalist Party following his return from France. The Federalists chose him as their vice presidential candidate nominee in 1800 presidential election, hoping that his presence on the ticket could win support for the party in the American South. Though Hamilton,
I want it's important to consider here that that's actually an error in what they just wrote. There were no vice presidential nominees. Everybody ran for president. The runner-up became vice president. He was chosen as the second strongest Federalist Party candidate behind Adams. And the assumption would be that if he won the second place finish, he would be vice president. But at the time, they didn't have vice presidential nominee in their elections until after the 12th Amendment.
very good catch, and that's why we always take Wikipedia with a big grain of salt. It's useful. It's useful as a guideline, but you better know your material or you'll be misled. Says, though Hamilton schemed to elect Pinckney president under the electoral rules then in place, both Pinckney and incumbent Federalist President John Adams were defeated by the Democratic Republican candidates, meaning Thomas Jefferson, in the only election ever decided.
And Aaron Burr.
Yes. Seeing little hope of defeating popular President Thomas Jefferson, the Federalists chose Pinckney as their presidential nominee in 1804. He loses in a landslide and then runs again in 1808 and loses to Madison. Where it's interesting is this thing right here called the XYZ Affair, and I wanted to talk about that.
Okay.
The XYZ Affair was a political and diplomatic episode in 1797 and 1798, early in the presidency of John Adams. And this leads to a quasi-war with France. So what happens is Adams sends over 3 diplomats: Charles Coatsworth Pinckney, who's already there, John Marshall, who would become the Secretary of State, and Elbridge Gerry. 3 prominent founding fathers. Do you want to say anything mean about Marshall real quick?
Well, Marshall actually, before he became Chief Justice, also, he would be the Secretary of State for John Adams. So keep that in mind too. And this is and the XYZ Affair is a fascinating, excuse that, is a fascinating episode because during the British and French discussions and quasi-war of their own, and actually what became a war, Jefferson, as vice president under Adams, was pushing that we got involved and we supported France. And Adams' response is, no, we show support for neither. So, but that came after he had already kind of caused this quasi-war early on in his presidency. So the question is, when he decided to take this neutral position later and support neither, was it as a result of his Federalist Party beliefs or because of a lesson from this?
And what this is that the French Foreign Secretary, a guy by the name of Charles Maurice de Talleyrand /Périgord. It's about the best I can do in my French pronunciation. He's the French foreign minister. He refuses to see the American delegates unless they pay a bunch of bribes. Months and months of trying to see the French government. It doesn't happen. Napoleon would end up getting involved when he took over. They almost went to war with France because of this. It got pretty ugly. But this is kind of the background of this guy who's about to speak. So, what does General Pinckney have to say? Very interesting guy, though. And he also noticed that he's from the South, where you didn't get a lot of the Federalists. The Federalists are more concentrated in the Northeast.
Right.
General Pinckney moves that the first branch, instead of being elected by the people, should be elected in such a manner as the legislature of each state should select.
Well, that language sounds familiar, don't it?
It sure does. He urged that this liberty would give more satisfaction, as the legislatures could then accommodate the mode of the conveniency and opinions of the people.
So, audience, the reason why I brought that up, so that sounds familiar, is in the Constitution, that's the language used for the senators and for the electors. And so, actually, not for the senators, but for the electors. The electors are chosen or elected in such manner as the legislature of each state should direct. senators would wind up were appointed by the state legislatures, but that language for electors. And so I wonder if that language was influential for later on when they were determining how to choose the electors, if Pinckney spoke up, or if this is something that was already kind of on the minds of people that the state legislature should be able to direct something when it came to some type of voting, if not the House, something else. So, but I just found it fascinating. That's the exact language they use in the Constitution regarding the election of the electors for
Very
president.
good point.
Mhm.
What's also interesting is remember how the Wikipedia actually said he wasn't part of either political party early on.
Mm.
But after the 1890s, he's talking about with a convention. I'm sorry, 1790s. Well, I'm only off by a century today. This convention is 1787, so he's not 100% a Hamiltonian at this point. He continues, 2, that it would avoid the undue influence of large counties, which would prevail if the elections were to be made in districts, as must be the mode intended by the report of the committee. This is that language of protecting the small from the big and the big from the small. This is one of the things that, this is evidence of what the founding fathers meant, that what original intent was, and one of the reasons why Reynolds v. Sims is such a terrible case.
And understand, when you were mentioning the Federalist Party, the idea of forming the Federalist Party, a Hamiltonian party, was going on right there in 1787. Whether or not it was during the convention or shortly after, I don't recall. But during this fight for the ratification over the Constitution, that's when the idea of forming this Federalist Party began to kind of bubble up. Now, you got to realize that Hamilton supported the Constitution. He wanted desperately for it to be ratified. But he wasn't necessarily a Federalist in the sense that the Federalists considered themselves to be. He was a Federalist in the sense that he wanted this federal government to be formed. He wanted this Constitution to take place. It just didn't go far enough. And maybe a party could get it there. But it didn't formalize into a national party until well into Washington's presidency in the 1790s. Now, that said, once it was formed, it wasn't too long after that that the Republican Party by Jefferson, not today's Republican Party of then, by Thomas Jefferson, was formed as a countermeasure against the Federalist Party. So Pinckney, I'm thinking, because of this move, this idea for this party, was already associated with Hamilton. He may not have been quite the Hamiltonian at that point, but I have a feeling he was associated with him. The ideas of this party were familiar to him. So, but I just wanted to keep that in mind as we're listening to him. All right, go ahead.
His third point of his motion, that otherwise disputed elections must be referred to the general legislature, which would be attended with intolerable expense and trouble to the distant parts of the republic. I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to here, other than long travel times. Mm-hmm. Does that make more sense to you besides that part?
I would say, yeah, that might be a part of it. Also, there is something else that comes to mind. There was an understanding, and remember too, this idea of localism was important, and for a central body to try to govern farthest reaches, regardless of travel time, didn't make sense because local issues, local government, and while the Hamiltonians weren't didn't believe in localism as much as the Jeffersonian Republicans did, the Southerners did. The Southerners were all about localism because they were so far away from everything else, and they didn't think that the industrial North or any politicians had any right to dictate to them how to run their business.
Mr. Luther Martin from Maryland seconds Mr. Pinckney's motion. And we should have like some boom, 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 boom music every time Hamilton's about to speak. Alexander Hamilton stands up, clears his throat, and prepares to say, he considered the motion as intended manifestly to transfer the election from the people to the state legislatures, which would essentially vitiate the plan. Fraud vitiates everything. That's where he's going with that. Vitiate means pretty much to nullify. It would increase that state influence which could not be too watchfully guarded against. So Hamilton's afraid the states are going to exercise too much power over this new general government because Hamilton wants to protect the general government and give it more power.
Yeah, it's interesting because your true Federalists, Jeffersonian Republicans, would come to believe that the government would become a danger to the states' authorities and sovereignty, and the Federalists were worried that the states would become a danger to the central authority. And it gives you a clear view of the difference of these two mindsets. And it brings to mind also this idea, because we were talking about the two parties earlier, and I hear people all the time complain about the two-party system. And this is a great example of how we naturally do this. We naturally go into a large government or small government kind of ideal as a human race. And we also always tend to move into one of two types of camps. We do it naturally as human beings. It is in our nature. If we were to hypothetically erase political parties, get rid of them completely and only vote for the man, an issue would come up. There'd be those against it. They'd be those for it. Birds of a feather flock together. They organize and pick leaders. Boom, you have your parties. We naturally do it. The question is, though, is when you have these parties, like anything, you have to make sure they don't accumulate too much power. So we went from the threat of a powerful government to a threat of powerful parties.
And I think it's interesting. It's important to point out to people this information is new to. The Federalists were not Federalists.
Mm-hmm.
The Anti-Federalists were the Federalists. The next guy to speak is George Mason, and he was an Anti-Federalist who actually believed in federalism.
Right.
So they did it. They changed. They've been doing that for more than 250 years. They've been playing around with the definitions of words, and they certainly did it with the parties, just like today's Republican Party. I'm not sure you could say that they're really into republicanism, nor is the Democrat Party really into democracy, although they kind of are.
Well, they are, but they want to use democracy to shoot us towards tyranny.
Yeah, they're in the late stages of democracies where they are now.
Yeah. So if you wanted to be completely honest, back during the time of the early parties, the Federalist Party would have been called the National Party or the Nationalist Party, meaning love of government and strong central power.
Exactly.
And then today, the Democratic Party, maybe its name is correct. Republican Party, they would probably, prior to anyway, the current president would have probably should, if they want to be accurate, would have been called the go along to get along party, but that's just me.
I'll rip on. I'll come up with a better nickname for the Republicans later on. The Democrat Party is not Democrat. It's not the Democratic. It is the Democrat. And maybe they are aptly named. Who knows? All right. Hamilton continues. All too must admit the possibility in case the general government, which we call the federal government now, should maintain itself, that the state governments might gradually dwindle into nothing. The system, therefore, should not be engrafted of what might possibly fail.
In other words, the states are on their way out. They're going to become provinces, so don't give them any. They're going to be gone anyway.
That's exactly right. Okay, now the Anti-Federalist, one or the other, George Mason, urged the necessity of retaining the election by the people. Whatever inconveniency may attend the democratic principle, it must actuate one part of the government. It is the only security for the rights of the people. So he's arguing for one house to be elected by popular vote.
Now, understand, this guy is not someone who wants democracy, pure democracy, but at the same time, you do have to have some principles of democracy in the system, make sure the people have a voice. After all, Declaration of Independence, consent to the governed. And you want there to be the consent to the governed. You want them to be involved. But at the same time, history shows that pure democracy, too much power in the hands of the people, is dangerous. So you give them this house. Then you've got to have a natural check and balance against that, just to make sure that they don't abuse their power. And then the people's house, the House of Representatives, would then become the check over the other thing to make sure it didn't abuse its power. This is the reason why it's so important for our two houses of Congress to be unique and different from each other, and why the 17th Amendment and Reynolds v. Sims at the state level has made the two houses of the legislatures too much alike, and they've stopped being checks against each other and echo chambers of each other.
It's interesting. He also says, whatever inconveniency may attend the democratic principle. Saying it's very inconvenient to give the people a say, but they need to have one because it's got to be
Right.
one of the pillars of this edifice that
Gotta
we're
be.
building. Got to be. Mr.
But it must
Sherman,
actuate one part of government, just a part of it,
that's exactly right.
because he doesn't believe in pure democracy. But we do need some of it in there.
It's one of the shorter and more important speeches we'll hear on this floor.
Yes.
Roger Sherman would like an election by the legislature best, but is content with the plan as it stands, which is the bicameral that we're talking about. Mr. Rutledge, that's New Jersey, right? No, he is South Carolina also. Could not admit the solidity of the distinction between immediate and immediate election by the people.
Or for another way of putting it, direct and indirect.
Thank you. It was the same thing to act by oneself and to act by another. This kind of speaks to my expanded electoral college argument. An election by the legislature would be more refined than an election immediately by the people, especially in today's age. We mass advertisement and super PAC money doesn't come into play, and would be more likely to correspond with the sense of the whole community. That's interesting, the point he's making. If this convention had been chosen by the people in districts, it is not to be supposed that such proper characters would have been preferred.
So in other words, the brighter minds of the standing legislature, the people who have the skill, the science of politics, chose these delegates. And if they're the ones choosing the members of representation, it would be better. Because you got to remember, they even though they're creating a new system, they want consent to the governed, they still have in their mind this European idea that the people are not very well informed. The people are not to be trusted fully. Democracy is dangerous. So there has to be some type of aristocratic element to the government, because the aristocratic element are those who are skilled in politics. You need at least to have some of that skill, some of that understanding involved in the system.
I don't think he's entirely wrong. When I start talking about the expanding electoral college, I'm making a similar point.
I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm telling you the way they thought. Yeah. Now, we hear the term aristocratic or that kind of idea, and we think, oh my gosh, the power system controlling things. Well, there's a way to blend the two, and this is what they were trying to do. They understood that aristocracy on its own is dangerous, especially if unleashed, you give an ultimate power. They understood that democracy was dangerous, and left alone, it would become dangerous. But if you've got the two in existence as checks against each other, it just might work. That was the attitude. Or at least ultimately, that was the attitude.
He concludes that delegates to Congress he thought had also been fitter men than would have been appointed by the people at large. Mr. Wilson, this is James Wilson of Pennsylvania, considered the election of the first branch by the people not only as the cornerstone, but as the foundation of the fabric, and that the difference between immediate and immediate. Did I just read that? No, he's actually using the same terms, isn't he?
Yeah.
Immediate and immediate.
And when they say immediate and immediate, all that means is direct, indirect, and direct election. That's all it means.
He's saying that the difference between the two is immense.
Mm-hmm.
The difference was particularly worthy of notice in this respect, that the legislatures are actuated not merely by the sentiment of the people, but have an official sentiment opposed to that of the general government, and perhaps to that of the people themselves.
In other words, it is not a functionary of the general government. It's not a democratic voice of people. It's somewhere in between, and so it both helps and opposes both sides.
Very good. And you want that kind of balance. It's what we always talk about.
Well, and remember, these checks and balances are a big part of what our system became. But a lot of those checks and balances are not these, this guy checks this guy who checks this guy. It was these natural checks and balances, like the voice of the states versus the voice of the people, and then the voice of the federal government through the vice president as president of the Senate, where you've got these different natural checks, checks against each other. That's going to create discussion, debate, and ultimately no concentration of power.
Yeah, who do you owe your allegiance to? And you want different parties to be part of it. Debate is good.
Well, and that's one of the things that James Madison argued in Federalist 10. The best way to control the factions is to set them against each other.
All right, next up is Mr. Rufus King. He's from Massachusetts, enlarged on the same distinction. He supposed the legislatures would constantly choose men subservient to their own views as contrasted to the general interest, and that they might even devise modes of election that would be subversive of the end in view. He remarked several instances in which the views of a state might be at variance with those of the general government, and mentioned particularly a competition between the national and state debts for the most certain and productive funds. Bookmark the sentence.
Well, and it's interesting because, well, first of all, remember Rufus King, while Massachusetts at the time winds up becoming a New York politician later in life. But King, it's interesting because he's kind of arguing from a binary point of view. Well, it's got to be one or the other. Either it's got to be the national argument or the state argument. Other way, because one's going to wind up destroying the other. So which do you want to survive? I mean, that's kind of how it comes across. And the question is, and this is something that some of the founders will start talking about, how can we get the two to coexist and work together? It doesn't have to be one or the other.
I said bookmark the sentence because he's the first one to bring up the competition between national and state debts. Mm-hmm. And he says for the most certain and productive funds. That's going to be a big...
and that kind of leads to this Hamiltonian idea and this idea that in the 14th Amendment of the federal government taking on all of the debt and the problems that winds up causing.
That's going to be a big deal, not only throughout the convention, but immediately thereafter. Mm-hmm. And you want to talk about where the slippery slope, where the government got out of control? It's this concept right here.
Well, in Article 6, it winds up addressing that. And it may be one of the few mistakes in the first 7 articles.
Yeah, I can agree with that. You know, it's what I always say. When you turn we turn the federal government into a piggy bank, you need to expect swine.
Yeah, they've been putting out pork ever since. All right, go ahead.
General Pinckney again. He's for making the state governments a part of the general system.
If they were to kind of sounds like a Hamiltonian thing, don't it?
Sure does, sounding like incorporation, doesn't it? Yeah. If they were to be abolished,
just make them provinces. Yeah, just make them a bunch of corporations, a bunch of provinces. You know, they can exist, but it's really the game of the central government. That's what he's essentially saying.
Yeah, it's administrative districts. If they were to be abolished or lose their agency, South Carolina and other states would have but a small share of the benefits of government. On the question for General Pinckney's motion to substitute the election of the first branch in such a mode as the legislatures should appoint instead of it being elected by the people, we have a no, an aye, a no, an aye, a no, an aye. So it's 3 apiece. Maryland divided. Virginia no, North Carolina no, South Carolina aye, and Georgia no. The noes have it.
And what's fascinating here, look carefully. The other southern states disagreed with the South Carolina delegates. Interesting. Well, remember, they're more state localism centric. I mean, you've got this Pinckney as a Federalist, Hamiltonian-minded guy in South Carolina is an anomaly because, as we stated earlier, the concentration of that line of thinking was up in, for the most part, New England. Now, that said, even Massachusetts thought it was a bad idea, but nonetheless, it is fascinating that this very, very nationalistic idea was shot down not only by the North but by South Carolina's neighbors, despite the fact they came from from South Carolina delegates.
So Pinckney, after being voted down, then moves that the first branch be elected by the people in such mode as the legislature should direct, but waived it on its being hinted that such a provision might be more properly tried in the detail of the plan. So he's punting.
He said, okay, fine. People can vote him in, but we'll consider later, maybe. And the ayes have it.
It's 11-1. Only nays were New Jersey and a divided Maryland.
Well, and you got to remember, New Jersey and Maryland, especially, except for maybe Delaware, were really concerned about the large population of states taking control. And when you have something voted in by the people, then the suggestion would be also that the number of representatives would be based on the number of people. And so you're going to see the smaller population states kind of buck against this idea a little bit.
Okay. Doug, because I know you and trust you so well, I'm going to trust you to do about a 2-minute monologue because my battery needs, I have to go downstairs and get a charger. And I don't want to cut this off. I'll be back in 2 minutes.
A 2-minute monologue? That's it? No, I'm joking.
I'll be right back.
Well, and here's what needs to be talked about. That's and I always have my charger right here, but that's beside the point. Now, here's the thing. And this, remember what I was saying earlier when it came to Federalist Paper number 10 and the battle of the factions. And when it came to have Madison in the Federalist Paper number 10, one of the things he said was the way to control the factions was to set them against each other. Not those exact words. That's basically what he said. But when he said factions, he meant different kinds of factions. You got your rural factions versus your industrial factions, your high population versus your low population, the way people live, the fishing versus the farming versus the industrial, all these different factions. These factions who believe the government should be stronger, weaker, localism, so forth. And whenever it came to any faction, any battle of factions, the problem is the faction with the majority will always win in a democratic system. And that can be dangerous because then what happens is the majority rules, mob rules, and you wind up with this tyranny through the majority. And so his attitude was the voice of the minority is important, regardless of what type of faction it is. Now, one of the biggest battle between the factions that goes on during the Constitutional Convention is this idea of the large populated states versus the smaller populated states. Once again, how do you make sure that that minority faction, that voice that doesn't have as loud of a voice, have a loud enough voice to make sure that the other doesn't dominate over them and just control everything? And so that's what these checks and balances, that's what these arguments are all about. So that's what he meant by setting the factions against each other. Well, then how do you do it? And this is where democracy was dangerous, because if you have pure democracy, then the faction with the most people automatically wins. How do you put a countermeasure against that? And this is where electoral college, each state getting 2 senators, and things like that, being appointed rather by a legislature rather than voted in. This is all these ideas that are different than what we would think is normal and was definitely outside what Europe would do, was designed to make sure that the larger population factions who had more power, control, and people behind them didn't just control everything. It gave that minority voice a voice. Now, that said, in modern politics, now you have, and get back to then, Jefferson called it the tyranny of the majority, right? Pure democracy, things like that. So now we have today in politics, you have certain people who want pure democracy and more government control, and they complain about the quote unquote tyranny of the minority. Well, there is no tyranny if the different voices all have a voice. And the idea of the minority having a voice is not a tyranny. It is an opportunity to avoid tyranny, to make sure that those that would normally be overwhelmed by numbers have a seat at the table.
Democracy, 50% plus one. You're going to make all the rules. A republic protects the rights of the minority.
Well, it goes back to even to the old joke about the original golden rule. He who has all the gold rules. It's once again, it's to offset tyranny, to offset this tyranny of the majority, or where a stronger faction, and this is just human nature. Once a stronger faction becomes strong enough to dominate, that's not enough. They dominate and dominate until they destroy the other. And America is designed not to allow that happen.
We saw that in 1860 when Lincoln wins with a plurality, and basically to the executive branch, he shows up there with all his executive branch administrators and basically takes over the entire government and sets us into a bloody civil war. All right, all right. Did we talk about Randolph? Now, here we go. Election of the first branch for the term of 3 years is considered. By the way, thanks for the monologue, Doug. I agree with everything you said, and I am now charging, so we're good to go.
So you heard me say I always keep my charger with my computer?
Did you say that?
Oh, come on now. All right, go ahead, though. This is interesting. 3 years and 2 years being both considered. This is interesting. Now, remember, Mr. Randolph is from Virginia, high populated state, and the state that presented the Virginia plan, he's actually the one that presented it, even though he's not the one that wrote it. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, they talked about staggering the terms of office, 3 years, 5 years, and 7 years. And now we're going to get past that nonsense, or at least start the beginnings of getting past it.
Yeah, they still want to stagger, but let's go to the even numbers. They stagger and stay staggered properly.
Makes the math so much easier.
Oh, yeah.
Move to strike out 3 years and insert 2 years. He was sensible that annual elections were a source of great mischief in the states, yet it was the want of such checks against the popular intemperance as were now proposed. Where's the happy medium? That rendered them so mischievous. He would have preferred annual to biennial, but for the extent of the U.S. and the inconveniency which would result from them to the representatives of the extreme parts of the empire, we're not an empire, by the way, or weren't supposed to be, the people were attached to frequency of elections. All the constitutions of the states, except that of South Carolina, had established annual elections. So he's actually suggesting 1 year is the best.
Now, let's real quick go back to that word empire. So Benjamin Franklin, in a speech that he actually wrote and had someone else read during the Constitutional Convention, at one point talks about the importance of prayer. And in his speech, he says that he believes that God is involved in the affairs of men and the creation of empires. He also used that word empire. Why would the founding fathers use the term empire when referencing the United States, but yet they weren't trying to create a British Empire model? Because they did believe that ultimately someday the U.S. would become an empire, but not an empire by empire by conquest, but an empire through emulation, and maybe even parts of the world wanting to become states. So a voluntary empire in a sense. And so this was on the minds of a lot of the founders, that's what we were creating, because, and this goes back to the Hamiltonian idea, you're in a world of empires. How do you compete in a world of empires? Because, if you're in a world of big bullies, it's hard to compete against the bullies unless you're as big as they are. And that's kind of the thinking here. So yes, an empire, but not an empire that is established by conquest, but an empire that is established by emulation, treaties, friendship, and maybe even added states from other places.
Yeah, at the same time, they were very much aware that republics work best when they stay small. So
right.
That's a
well,
thought
they feared that a lot of these systems wouldn't work in larger countries. Yes.
All right, Mr. Dickinson. of Delaware. John Dickinson says the idea of annual elections was borrowed from the ancient usage of England, a country much less extensive than ours. Square footage, yes. Empire, no. He supposed biennial would be inconvenient. He preferred triennial, every 3 years, and in order to prevent the inconveniency of an entire change of the whole number at the same moment, suggested a rotation by an annual election of 1/3. It's the first
That
time we've seen
also
that.
that also kind of sounds familiar. That's what they ultimately wind up doing with the Senate.
Yes.
That last part, election of 1/3, but every 2 years rather than annual.
Mr. Ellsworth was opposed to 3 years, supposing that even 1 year was preferable to 2. The people were fond of frequent elections and might be safely indulged in one branch of the legislature. He moved for 1 year. Do you think the people like elections that much, Doug, or do you think they did back then?
Well, people liked the ability to make a change if they realized they really screwed up with the wrong person and make that change quickly. It's one of the reasons why they ultimately did land on 2 years, and it's less than president and the Senate. Is when the people's voice is involved and they screw up, it's easy to fix that screw up with a frequent election. That was the thinking.
The other part is culturally, I don't care what state it is, you're not going to see the people halfway across the state more than once a year. This is like an annual holiday, a chance to get together, meet old friends,
Sure.
conduct business, and
can
air
see
your
that.
grievances without a doubt. So there may have been more truth to it back then.
Mm-hmm.
What we see in today is it's really hard to get people to show up for primaries even every 2 years.
Well, yeah, because they're too busy on social media.
Or worse. Mr. Strong, who is from, do we have that? I don't have a Mr. Oh, here he is. Caleb Strong from Massachusetts seconds and supports the motion. Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, he, by the way, did not stay long enough to sign the document.
Is that right? Caleb Strong is not a signer.
No.
Mr. Wilson, being for making the first branch an effectual representation of the people at large, preferred an annual election of it. This frequency was most familiar and pleasing to the people. Means easier to pass. When talking about ratification, when I say pass, they want everything they've drawn up needs to be something that the people are actually going to ratify. That's in the back of their minds with everything they're proposing. Are the people going to go ballistic when we try to tell them what we just created? He says it would not be more inconvenient to them than triennial elections, as the people in all the states have annual meetings with which the election of the national representatives might be made to coincide. He did not conceive that it would be necessary for the national legislature to sit constantly, perhaps not half, perhaps not 1/4 of the year.
Now, remember, there's something that I love to fondly refer to in Article 1, Section of, I believe it's 4. I'm going to make sure that's exactly where it is. Yeah, Article 1, Section 4, where it says the Congress shall assemble at least once in every year. And here you've got Wilson saying, I don't even know if we're going to meet a quarter of the year. And there were those that would actually mumble, should we meet even that often? Because this is considered service to your nation. This is not your job. People who plan to be quote unquote professional politicians, you've got a farm, you've got a store to keep, you've got a fishing boat to run or whatever. And also you believe in local government. You don't want the federal government to be that busy. We need it for external issues, but unless we're at war, why do we need to be in our seats?
Exactly. If you're going to follow the enumeration doctrine and stick in your lane, the federal government only doing what it's supposed to do, you don't need to be meeting year round. The decisions aren't that frequent. James Madison comes in, speaking in the third person about himself. He was persuaded that the annual elections would be extremely inconvenient and apprehensive that biennial would be too much so. He's saying they would also be inconvenient. So he did not mean inconvenient to the electors, but to the representatives. They would have to travel 700 or 800 miles from the distant parts of the Union and would probably not be allowed even a reimbursement for their expenses. Imagine that. Besides, none of those who wished to be reelected would remain at the seat of government, confiding that their absence would not affect them. It's a brilliant point. Compare that to today's politicians. The members of Congress had done this with few instances of disappointment, but as the choice was here to be made by the people themselves, who would be much less complacent to individuals and much more susceptible of impressions from the presence of a rival candidate, it must be supposed that the members from the most distant states would travel backwards and forwards at least as often as the election should be repeated. They got to go home to campaign, Doug. Pretty much.
Pretty much. Well, and I think also he's recognizing that not only that, but if you've got annual elections and you are going home to campaign and you need to do work in Washington, there's a problem there. You're spending time getting ready for your reelection rather than doing the work of the people, so to speak. This reminds me of a conversation I had with Steve Stockman, who was a member of the United States Congress House of Representatives after Ron Paul left. He was Paul's replacement in Texas there in the House of Representatives. And he said that they spent they spent about 6 months working and the other month, year and a half working on a reelection. And so I get to thinking about what Madison's here is saying. They're going to go home. They're going to be on the road. They're prepared. And if there needs to be work done, they're not there. That's A. B, you got to remember, these are people who believe that what's best for any system are people who are skilled in the science of politics. If you're not there long enough to get skilled because you're already replaced, it's not going to work well for the country. I think that's one of the thoughts that he has too with this.
Yeah, that's pretty much in play. I mean, this is actually Madison's one of his better earlier speeches is right here, and he makes valid points. He hasn't transformed into our Jeffersonian Madison yet, but he's getting there. His last point's interesting. Much was to be said also on the time requisite for new members who would always form a large proportion, or to acquire the knowledge of the affairs of states in general, without which their trust could not be usefully discharged.
That's what I was just saying. I didn't realize that was the next part. I remember reading it long ago. Boy, I tell you, sometimes my memory's weird. But yeah, then that's what he's basically saying. Hey, if a country's going to run properly, we need politicians who are skilled in politics. If you've got new guys coming in every year, they're never there long enough to get skilled in politics. And what you see today is what winds up happening. Kind of an extension of that is then the staff winds up running the country, not the people in office, because the people in office are dependent on the staff because they're not skilled, because they're not there long or whatever. And that's what has happened in California with term limits is no one is there long enough to get skilled in politics. And so basically they depend so heavily on staff. Staff runs the state.
And of course,
and who's in the staff?
And the lobbyists tell the staff what to do.
And the lobbyists, yeah.
It's the exact opposite of what these people were trying to build, by the way.
Exactly.
Mr. Sherman preferred annual elections, but would be content with biennial. He thought the representatives ought to return home and mix with the people. Brilliant. By remaining at the seat of government, they would acquire the habits of the place which might differ from those of their constituents. Boy, that never happened, did it, Doug?
That's interesting because someone once asked me, Doug, does Washington corrupt good people or do corrupt people go to Washington? I tell people usually it's a little bit of both, but absolutely. This is what Sherman is saying. The place corrupts them. And if they're there all the time, if they're only going home for, now this is to assume they're only going home for a re-election. And when one considers the distance, maybe, but it is an interesting point that Sherman's making because he's basically saying, yeah, Washington's going to corrupt these people if they're too much. They're too much. We want them to have to fight for the election because then they got to mix with the people to do it, and that maybe that'll keep them from getting corrupted by the place.
Well, why don't we just torch Washington, D.C. to the ground and have our Congress critters stay home all the time and meet via Zoom. Save us a lot of money and headaches.
Well, yeah, but then you have the problem of AI then impersonating people, and eventually there are no representatives; they're just AI avatars.
Well, now that
running the country.
caning on the floor of Congress, caning the other politicians is no longer in fashion. There's really no point in them meeting. That's funny.
Canings still go on.
No, we haven't.
Al Green, right? Oh, never mind.
All right. Colonel Mason observed that the states, being differently situated, such a rule ought to be formed as would put them as nearly as possible on a level. The geographical differences. We need a level playing field. If elections were annual, the middle states would have a great advantage over the extreme ones. He wished them to be biennial, and the rather, as in that case, they would coincide with the periodical elections of South Carolina as well as other states.
It's interesting that a Virginian's bringing up South Carolina's. Maybe this is a direct stab at Pinckney.
Well, he's the one that introduced this stuff, so
yeah.
All right. Hamilton, boom, 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 comes in and he urges the necessity of
play the Darth Vader theme.
I'm gonna have to. I'll have that queued up next time, so we can play that. Hamilton urges the necessity of 3 years, which you're going to find here, people, is almost every single thing that Hamilton suggests doesn't make it into the Constitution.
And it's fascinating. Hamilton suggesting this after Sherman says, "Well, if they're too long, they get corrupted by being there." Well, then of course Hamilton wants them there longer.
Well, the part that gets me is, basically everything that they passed and put in the Constitution, he had other ideas and opposed.
Mm-hmm.
And then after he gets outvoted, he's the guy writing the Federalist Papers, or one of the two main writers, trying to get this thing to be passed. And it just shows Hamilton's priority was a bigger government no matter what. I can't get it as big as I want. I'll take what you're going to give me, and then I'll corrupt it later.
Which he began to do as Department Secretary of the Treasury, and as an influential, very influential character on the Adams presidency. A lot of what we didn't want that he thought was a good idea, some of it we did after a while because of him or because of his followers.
So Darth Vader would continue. It says there ought to be neither too much nor too little dependence on the popular sentiments. All right.
That's actually a good statement.
Yeah.
But see, this is what Hamilton does.
He's a wordsmith.
It's a piece of truth. And then he wordsmiths it exactly.
The checks in the other branches of government would be but feeble and would need every auxiliary principle that could be interwoven. Now, is he talking about the other branches as we call them today, or the other legislative branch? Sounds like he's talking about today's definition.
Yeah, but notice when he speaks, in a sense, he makes sure that it sounds good. It sounds like it's specific, but it's also kind of broad and ambiguous.
The British House of Commons were elected septennially, yet the democratic spirit of the Constitution had not ceased.
Yeah, it did. He lied right there, but then again, it's not surprising.
Septennially is every 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Frequency of I actually had to ask that.
No, wait. No, that's every 7. Every 7.
Is it 7? Okay.
Yeah, it's every 7 years.
I've been out of college.
Continually would be 5.
Thank you. It's been way too long since I studied that. Frequency of elections tended to make the people listless to them and to facilitate the success of little cabals. This evil was complained of in all the states. In Virginia, it had been lately found necessary to force the attendance and voting of the people by severe regulations. Now that's an interesting statement. He doesn't want the elections too frequently. He wants it every 3 years because the people won't show up. And even Virginia had to force people to vote. So
Is he
They
saying
put it,
that if we go to anything less than 3 years, it suppresses the vote?
I think something along those lines. I think he's really pushing for his longer terms.
He really is the first Democrat. He really is. Anyway, all right, go ahead.
All right, so this question is put to the floor for vote. We have an aye, a no. New Jersey divided, an aye, and a no, aye. Striking out 3 years is gone.
Delaware, Maryland, and New Jersey, either no or divided. That makes sense. Smaller states, they're wanting. They're
New York's a
thinking
no.
of they're the fear. They have fear. New Jersey's divided. Maryland's no. Delaware's no. They fear that if the big states are pushing for something, it's probably not good for them. But I'm fascinated that New York was also a no. Now understand, at that time, Hamilton wasn't the only delegate from New York still, I don't believe, right? Robert Yates had left, but the other one was still there.
I believe they're all three there. We haven't seen.
Are they all three there? Yeah, Robert Yates hadn't left yet. So you still have all three there. That's right. It's at the 6-week mark. We're just past 6 weeks that they take off. So you'll notice in a little while, New York won't even have a say, because when Robert Yates and John Langston, I think is his name, when they leave, it leaves Hamilton by himself.
John Lansing Jr.
Lansing, thank you. That was close. Got the LAN right.
So the 3 years, we got the first name right too. So that's good. On the question,
every once in a while I can pull a file out of this head, every once in a while. But anyway, go ahead.
So 3 years is struck out, and the motion for 2 years is then inserted.
Right.
Nem.com. That's probably a good place to adjourn for today.
Yeah.
But pretty interesting conversation going on.
This was a fun one to talk about, because you're starting to finally see some of the things starting to fall into place. But understand, while it's near the end of this period, they still believe they're trying to fix the Articles of Confederation. But I have a feeling at this point, and you can hear it from a lot of the conversations, they're understanding that's not the case. It just hasn't been said out loud yet.
Yeah, and our boy that we featured today, Mr. Pinckney, General Charles Coteworth Pinckney, he's going to make some more appearances here, and he's going to be an interesting one to watch. So I'm glad we introduced him in a little more detail today.
And he does stay the whole time and winds up being a signer.
Yeah, and twice failed.
Unlike
president.
Strong. Yeah. We're gonna be losing Strong. We're gonna be losing Yates. We're gonna be losing Lansing and a few others. And there are 3 of them that do make it to the end that don't sign it. But we'll get to that at the end of the last episode,
which is quite some time off.
Yeah,
quite a ways off. Thank you for taking the time today, Doug. Do you want to tell everyone where they can find you?
DouglasVGibbs.com. I'm writing just about every day. If you're not visiting DouglasVGibbs.com every day to see I've been writing some really, really interesting things about the war. But see, here's the thing. I'm not telling you what everybody else is telling you. For example, in my latest article about Operation Epic Fury, I give you some history from Jefferson and Madison, and I make a comparison. You're not hearing that anywhere else. Go to DouglasVGibbs.com to read it. If you want to be on the email list where you get emails about when I appear on shows and a list of articles when I get those out there, go to navigation to liberty. Navigation, the number 2, liberty.com, navigation, the number 2, liberty.com. Scroll down where it says join the email list, hit it there. Also, I've got my Ask Doug thing working at douglasvgibbs.com. So if you've got a question, you're like, dude, I got to find out. I got to ask the constitutionalist. Go to Ask Doug. You just douglasvgibbs.com in that link bar where it says Ask Doug. It's right next to the join link where you can help fund what we do for $9 a month. Right next to that link, hit the Ask Doug, fill it out, send the question. I'll respond. And if you can't get a hold of Doug and got questions, check me out on Twitter/X at war_Hampshire1776, where I'm usually pretty responsive and I do have my DMs open.
Doug, as always, absolute pleasure. We're going to get back into a regular routine on this, and I enjoy these shows quite a bit. I'm glad people are enjoying the fact that we're both back. Until the next time, everybody. Cheers.